Hello, hello, and good evening, everyone. This is yet another solo video brought to you by myself, Dalton the Authenticator, and this one is surprisingly unplanned by comparison to my other slightly more well-reasoned and well-structured work here. But long story short, Anglantine messaged me at like 2:30 this afternoon and wanted to do a stream about the DC James Gunn slate, for that is the biggest news in the docket in this day and age. And I obviously missed it because, for those that watched it, I was not there because I was still sleeping at 2:30 tonight because I didn't go to bed until 8 o'clock the previous morning. So I decided that rather than wait around to share my views elsewhere, although I probably will be also talking about this on the podcast of the Storm come not this Sunday, because this Sunday is the beginning of February and we do Valentine's Day stuff then, but in March we'll be covering that. Anyway, but until then, I figured, hey, I'm allowed to do solo videos on this channel now, and so we're doing my take on the DC James Gunn slate thing. First of all, James, when people asked you when you'd be releasing things, you said sometime in January. That does not, in any normal person's mind, translate to early on January the 31st. And if you meant January the 31st, you could have just said January the 31st and come off as much less of a dick about it. Secondly, and as you can see by the title, you all know what I'm going to say first. You all know by now who I am and what I do and my area of special geekdom with regards to monsters, magic users, deities, etc. And so I was watching the James Gunn Slate video here not 10 minutes ago, maybe? And he gets to the part where he calls it Gods and Monsters. And I'm thinking, okay, this from the guy who gave us the weirdness that was Guardians and the weirdness that was Suicide Squad 2. I can't wait for finally my obscure, favorite magic users to finally get some play. And yes, I'm aware Gods and Monsters was an actual storyline that was also made into a movie, but when James Gunn, of all people, tells me, okay, we're doing our first slate and it's called Gods and Monsters, far be it from me to expect some gods and some monsters. But as you can see by the title, I got hardly any gods and hardly any monsters in this thing called Gods and Monsters, and it left me feeling like that one random Michael Myers character from Saturday Night Live all that while ago, the stereotypical like Jewish mother who would would deconstruct the shit out of things that lied about what they were. So yeah, DC Chapter 1, Gods and Monsters, now with neither gods nor monsters. Discuss. Yeah, let's go through it. And no, I'm not going to pull up the video because I don't know how to pull up the video while still maintaining the stream because I do everything from my phone, guys. But I'm doing it from memory, and like I said, I watched it like 10 minutes ago, so I should be mostly okay. Bouncing in and out of animation and doing the multi-medium thing. I don't know how well that's going to work for him, because that seems to be jumping right into the MCU Phase 4 strategy, which is currently crippling the shit out of the MCU for the most part, for various reasons. And DC doesn't have the capital to burn like Marvel does. It doesn't have the opportunity for people will still stick around even if we have an era or two of growing pains, even if some people get upset with it. DC is on its last legs, and they go, let's copy MCU Phase 4. That surely won't backfire horribly on us at all. Okay, James, that's a maneuver. Bearing in mind people are already upset with you for nixing everything they liked about the sort of between Snyderverse and now era. Like, because, yeah, a lot of people didn't like the Snyderverse, but there were things in the Snyderverse that were worth preserving, and DC was slowly course correcting. with things like Wonder Woman, with things like Shazam, with things like Black Adam, with things like your own Suicide Squad, and so on. Like DC was in the process of course correcting. You didn't have to go complete universe reboot on us. And quite frankly, it's kind of frustrating to see a a movie company make the same mistake as the DC Comics company has made for the last 20 years or so, namely, let's reboot our universe every 5 years. That totally won't cause diminishing returns or diminishing interest in what we do. Also, hi Ed, I didn't want to. This isn't going to be a talking head video quite as much as my Doctor Fate and Doctor Strange videos are. This is going to be my take on the apparent fiasco that is the James Gunn thing. Second, yeah, I was going on about how the switching from shows to movies and switching from animation to live action was very much copying the worst aspects of the Phase 4 strategy, or at least some of the worst aspects. We don't know how woke these things are going to be, but I'm not filled with the most hope, because DC seems intent on doing every wrong thing in the book and pissing off fans as deliberately as they can, which is very much a harbinger of woke doom. So that's somewhere to begin. Yeah. Also, hello to the frog. The frog in the chat. He's basically my own personal Michigan J frog at this point. But anyway, on to the other thing. The other thing I noticed that made me unsettled with this new chapter of the DCEU, apart from again the aforementioned and mentioned in the title, a gods and monsters titled thing with neither gods nor monsters, which does vex me horribly, especially when I figured James Gunn was an obscure enough fanboy that he and I kind of would bond over the love of obscure characters, because we have literally every other time he's made a comic book movie. But I digress. Was he goes back and forth from being so ludicrously conventional I can hardly believe that it came out of his head, to just picking out these random little pockets of weirdness and expecting it to be a cohesive whole. And also, I don't mean to be a dick, but I'm going to be a dick anyway, because as much as the interconnected universe thing works, and it does work when you can do it right, even when the three phases of Marvel were building up, they didn't all serve a single story, i.e., there were independent stories in between the larger narratives, so that they didn't all have to be so ludicrously interconnected together. Which again is going to come back to bite him when you consider that he's tying in movies and shows and animation and live action. It's a lot of moving parts to keep track of, and if Phase 4 of the Marvel Universe is any of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is any indication, it slowly is killing the enthusiasm people have for Marvel, insofar as they have enough left. No, 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 Frog. What we need is a prequel trilogy that follows Kent Nelson in his younger days, where Kent Nelson is played by Matt Smith, Naboo is voiced by Oded Freyr, and it's directed by Wes Anderson. That is what that is what is on like my number one cinematic Christmas list here. But we'll never get it, because that would require it to tie into Black Adam, which is not going to do, because again, it seems like DC makes every deliberately confusing, deliberately befuddled choice in the book in order to self-sabotage themselves. But on to more of the specific projects. Waller, where Waller will in fact still be played by Viola Davis. I don't know. It's so frustrating, because it's like, okay, so you get rid of Cavill. We can't have a Cavill Superman because reasons. You get rid of Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman because we can't have that anymore because reasons. You're keeping Ezra Miller and using him as the anchor to Flashpoint. Wonder if that's going to come back to bite you horribly in the ass when everyone is boycotting the shit out of that movie for various justified reasons, up to but not limited to the fact that he doesn't have talent proportional with the absolutely abjectly horrible shit he's done. Because that's the thing. Ezra Miller could do the horrible shit he's done, but if he were a truly good actor, I would bring out the same defense I bring out for people like Roman Polanski. I.e., I don't care about the morality of the person, I care about the quality of their art. But he's not a good actor. So like there is no quality to his art to lean on for me. And then you have the he's done all these horrible things, and you have the other little canard that um uh Johnny Depp wasn't treated this way. J.K. Rowling is barely, isn't treated this way. Anyone else who puts a foot out of line ever, morally speaking, or uh, public domain, like court of public opinion speaking, is pilloried in effigy before they've even gotten 2 words out. But Ezra Miller can be caught on footage literally choking a bitch, and he's still a darling of Hollywood. I don't get this. But my point and how it relates to Waller is, so we're keeping things related to Peacemaker and we're keeping things related to Waller. And I know there's some jiggery pokery that you can get away with to some degree with Flashpoint in that you can keep some things and not others. But do you really think that's going to go over well with the fan base? Given how much shit James Gunn has already copped for getting rid of Cavill and Gadot and presumably also Jason Momoa. Like, which that's another question entirely. But like, given all the shit he's already copped for getting rid of everything everyone liked, both the Snyderverse people and the era after the Snyderverse but before now people, the people who acknowledged that DC did at least try to reform itself and was doing a halfway decent job of it. They're all sitting there going, why would you do this like that? And he's already getting this backlash before a single tape has been rolled as far as the movies he's making are going. And I have a lot of faith in James Gunn. He's made some of my favorite comic book movies. He made The Guardians. He made Suicide Squad 2. He's an excellent director. But one, there's a vast difference between being a very good outside of the box director who can liven up otherwise ordinary proceedings and being a Kevin Feige type character who's in charge of maintaining an entire universe. And I'm not sure James has the chops. Part two of my criticisms of James Gunn is it seems like ever since he got fired and rehired because of the fired James Gunn scandal, he's lost a little bit of what makes him fun. Because even in the trailer for Guardians 3, I was thinking, okay, where's the color? Okay, where's the zaniness? Okay, where's the stuff that defines Guardians as a like cinematic entity? And it's like, if you wanted to lean this in a more thematically serious direction, you didn't have to get rid of all the color, James. Come on. But no, he's deciding to ground it, which that's going to work so well because it worked so well with Eternals when Eternals deliberately spat in the face of the Guardians formula. But whatever. But yeah, it seems like he's lost a little bit of his magic with regards to post rehiring of James Gunn. And I don't know as I want to see the cynical, broken version of James Gunn's vision. I wanted to see the I have zany ideas and I'm going to own the shit out of that James Gunn, which probably would have been the James Gunn who proposed Gods and Monsters with some actual gods and some actual monsters mixed in. But again, I digress. Like, that will never cease to befuddle me because I was genuinely excited for a minute. I was genuinely like, okay, so are we gonna get like the various champions of the green, the white, the red, the black, etc.? Are we gonna get more focus on gods and mythology and Wonder Woman and Shazam and so on and so forth? Are we going to get that stuff? Are you actually going to give me a canonical Doctor Fate that doesn't die at the end of the first movie so that I actually have something to look forward to there? Are we keeping the Justice Society in some warped way? No, no, none of that. Just we're calling it gods and monsters not included. Okay, that's and I know it's a storyline and I know it was a movie too, but when James Gunn of all people, James, I'm putting the sapient tree and the sapient raccoon in the movie Gunn, and also the demigod shark Gunn, um, in the movie. Like, it is when that person tells me this phase is called Gods and Monsters, I expect to see some gods and some monsters. And I guess you could kind of get away with it with the lanterns thing um because Parallax and the other like lantern entities and also the Guardians of the Universe kind of fit, sort of. And I guess we're getting a Swamp Thing movie, presumably based on the Alan Moore run, which is good news. But I kind of thought that would be like part. I kind of thought that would be like the first thing out of your mouth when you proposed Gods and Monsters. But maybe I'm just too optimistic. Anyway, back to Waller because I got way off on a tangent about other things. The fact that they're keeping Viola Davis, bearing in mind that she was in Black Adam, which they're not keeping any part of, and they're keeping all the Peacemaker stuff, is going to be such a goddamn landmine because they're not keeping Godot and they're not keeping Cal. They might keep Jason Momoa, or they might recast him in a different role, which would be stupid. And they very well might be trying to keep Ezra Miller, although I expect after the Flash movie bombs, that will go up in so many flames. But anyway, like of all the people you would keep, you keep her. And also side note, if she's going to play the role, she's going to have to do what a lot of other male actors have had to do and make her physique in line with the role, which in her case means gaining weight. Amanda the Waller is very much a plus size person, to put it in semi PC terms. So she should not be skinny. And the fact that she's been skinny all this time, I was thinking, okay, she's starting out skinny. Maybe she'll become the Amanda Waller everyone's familiar with as the timeline goes by. But never mind that, because the timeline that was mostly isn't now. So either Viola Davis needs to get in Amanda Waller shape, just like what was his name that was Kingpin in the Ben Affleck Daredevil? The guy that was big but also looked like he could take someone apart. That's the kind of shape that I expect Amanda Waller to be in, because that's who she is. She's big, but she can take anyone she likes apart, and she can stand up to Batman. Which, how in the heck we've never gotten the live action equivalent of the Batman versus Amanda Waller scenes in the Cadmus story arc of Justice League, bearing in mind that Amanda Waller was first introduced in Suicide Squad back in 2017, it's just beyond me. Like, that's what makes Amanda Waller cool, but you're going to have Amanda Waller and you're not going to keep any of the things that make her cool or interesting. That's a choice. I'll give you that's a choice. Anyway, I'm going to look at the chat now because I realized I trailed off a little bit again. Um, um, See, this is the thing about Blue Beetle. I love Jaime. I think most people in my generation love Jaime. But I don't know if he's the right place to start with. Unless they kind of tie in the like ancient Egyptian origins of the scarab, like the alien technology that landed in ancient Egypt and then Naboo hexed so that it was inert, and that's why Ted Cord and is it Dan Garrett that was the other Blue Beetle before Jaime? Couldn't use the actual scarab. Like, if they tie in that stuff, the whole gods and monsters theme can work. But it's just like, okay, that's like, again, you call thing gods and monsters, but I'm not seeing many gods nor many monsters in it. And that is very, very frustrating, James. I thought we were on the same page. Obscure characters are awesome. Now give me some. Um, and then of course you have the biggest elephant in the room, which is his new version of Superman that he has the goal of calling Superman Legacy, which I don't know how that's gonna tie in, considering it's a younger Superman who has no legacy to speak of, unless they're doing John Kent, and that's how they'll tie in the Cavill Superman, which is gonna have some problems because in his teenage years, John became an anarchistic little twit. So, meh. Um, yeah, it again. It's like every decision is either slightly wrong or the exact opposite of the choice that they probably should have made. Um, with regards to the Lanterns, love the idea of doing John Stewart finally. Um, especially doing kind of a buddy cop thing with Hal Jordan. Why isn't that a mainline movie though? Why is that an HBO Max series instead of a movie? You'd think if anything deserved to be a movie, that would be a movie. And Supergirl would be the HBO Max show, which by the way, we're getting a Supergirl. And the gimmick is that she's going to be jaded and downtrodden because of the trauma of surviving Krypton, which on paper doesn't sound bad, and the way James sold it made it sound interesting, but I'm really worried that's just going to be yet another excuse to give us a jaded, cynical Mary Sue a la Captain Marvel. And of all the things I never knew I didn't want the most, that might top the list of the things that I didn't want the most. Um, especially because having a Supergirl and a Superman in the same universe is always somewhat difficult outside of the comics and the cartoons. So good luck balancing that one, especially considering the Superman you're giving us isn't one people want, and the one people do want, you've made very clear you have no problem dancing on the grave of. And that's the other thing. A lot of my perceptions here might be colored by the fact that James Gunn has been an absolute bitch about this on Twitter. He's been an absolute bastard. So maybe he has the skills to pay the bills, and that's why he's cocky. And given that it's James Gunn and he has an amazing track record for superhero movies, I will leave that space on my bingo card open. But I don't expect to fill it because he's in a creative slump. He's working with characters that are outside of his wheelhouse of zany weirdness. Um, he's oscillating between being too obscure when he needs to be concrete and being too concrete when he could probably stand to be more obscure. Um, and let's actually also talk about the Authority, because the minute he announced he was doing an Authority thing, I just went, so you're ripping off the boys, because that's why that's there. Like, I get that the Authority are a separate thing, but does anyone under the sun have any doubts that he's using the Authority to basically rip off the boys? And if you do have doubts, please explain those doubts to me, because my brain just immediately went, okay, so they saw the boys doing really, really well, and they said we want one of those. Granted, that was kind of what Black Adam was, and you didn't want to keep that, so duh. Um, anyway, back to the chat, because periodically checking the chat does seem to help keep me focused. Um, see, yeah, okay. I'm of the school that says that the DC universe doesn't need to follow Marvel's playbook exactly, but I think what Chrononaut is referring to is where is the mainline character. according to some rumors, which now seem to be confirmed by the slate that James Gunn just revealed, Amanda Waller is supposed to be the Nick Fury / Iron Man character. Which, if she were actually a recognizable version of Amanda Waller and you didn't have the specter of, we decided to keep Viola but not Henry, hanging over the entire DCEU, I'd be okay with that, because Amanda Waller, as she should be presented, like she has been presented by C.H. Pounder in the animated series, or like she was presented by the actress who played her in the Checkmate arc of Smallville, because both of those were actually pretty good. If it were that Amanda Waller, I'd say Bob's your uncle. That's perfect. She's basically female, slightly evil, or Nick Fury. That's fine. But it's Viola, and there has to be some loose canonicity with at least the Peacemaker and Suicide Squad 2 stuff, because the guy who's behind Peacemaker and Suicide Squad 2 is now running the entire show. But not running the entire show with the energy he put into that, which frustrates me. Like, I assumed, at the very least, despite all of the stupid decisions James Gunn was making, we would at least get a DCEU slate that was interesting and fun and embraced the wackier side of comics. And I think he's trying to, but the obscure things he pulled are so obscure that even I was like, okay, you're not going to be able to use that to tell an interesting story, though. Or are directly ripping off other things, like the way the Authority is very transparently ripping off The Voice. Or probably is going to. And then we come to the fact that there are going to be 2 Batmen now. Matt Reeves' version, which is going to be in Elseworlds, which I'm fine with there being Elseworlds. That's not the issue. But also a version of Batman entitled The Brave and the Bold, where the Robin for There Will Be a Robin is not Dick Grayson. It's not Jason Todd. It's not Tim Drake. The first Robin to be cinematically portrayed in something like 20 years is going to be Damian Wayne. See, this is the thing, and it's a similar problem to what the MCU is kind of currently dealing with. You can skip ahead to modern stories and modern characters if you want, but you could have mined at least 10 years of content out of filling the gap between the original stories that you tried to make and now. And instead of that, you're basically just seeing this version of comics that has a bunch of cracks in it, a bunch of obvious and avoidable failures in it, and going, we need to get ourselves some of that. And I'm like, you could have had Tim, you could have had Jason, you could have had Dick. Why Damian first? I'm not saying we couldn't get to Damian ever, but why Damian first? And given that the title was Brave and the Bold, I was kind of left with the impression, because it's called Brave and the Bold, that it was at least going to be somewhat Silver Agey, and the fact that it's based on a Grant Morrison run did not disabuse me of that. So, like, the title is Brave and the Bold, but you're going with the arguably edgiest, most bratty teenager version of Robin. Okay, that's a choice. That's probably the exact opposite choice I would have made, but so be it. And then we finally at the end of his presentation get to Swamp Thing, and I'm like, why wasn't this the first thing? Because the title you proposed was Gods and Monsters, so shouldn't there be more gods and monsters? Also, apparently we're getting Booster Gold, and I don't. Like, I don't even would, because there's a couple routes you could go with Booster Gold. You could go a Shazam-like route, but then again, Shazam already exists. Or you could go a slightly edgier route and basically make him DC's Deadpool, which would kind of make sense because he's from the future, and so he can meta-commentate all he wants. but I but either you're going to be ripping off Deadpool or you're going to be trying to make a better Deadpool. And neither of those things seem likely to work, especially because DC is in it's not even in its dumpster fire phase. The Snyderverse was its dumpster fire phase. This is the slowly smoldering ashes of what used to be the dumpster fire phase of DC. And yes, there used to be like sprouts and things growing in those ashes, but you went through with a lawnmower and chipped them all because the DC universe was slowly course correcting, and then you were like hard right into the opposite course. Okay, that's an option. It's a stupid option. It's an option you shouldn't take, but it's an option. Let's see. The Supergirl in Smallville started out jaded, so maybe it could work. I think I'd rather see a jaded, unsure Supergirl over the CW version. But, yeah, but here's the thing. Given modern Hollywood, how do you think her jadedness is going to manifest? Is she going to A, be a fully well-rounded jaded character who slowly learns to loosen the frick up, or is she going to channel that jadedness into a bunch of feministy resentment for the Kryptonian patriarchy that destroyed Krypton, or something to that effect? Or are they just going to make her a slightly jaded feminist Mary Sue character like they did with Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel in the MCU? So that's why I'm slightly annoyed with the prospect of a jaded Supergirl, especially when you consider um especially when you consider that there's going to be a Superman who I hope to God is finally going to be optimistic in this universe, i.e., like Superman should be. And I don't even like Superman is definitively not my area, but I know enough about Superman from people who I know who like Superman to know, could we finally get a sincere, aw shucks-ish Clark Kent slash Superman already? Given that the template for that character already exists in the MCU, just take what they did with Captain America and scale it up to fit Clark. Like same shyness, same humble to a fault, same mom baseball apple pie aw shucks attitudes, like same kind of simple but good heartedness, and so on and so forth. And yet the powers he has are Superman's, not Cap's. Like that would be how you do a Superman in the modern age. Like the MCU already did it with Cap. It's just click and drag, guys. But I worry slightly about there being a jaded Supergirl because eventually, presumably, these characters have to cross over. And when these characters cross over, is Clark's optimistic nature going to deconvert Supergirls? Or is modern Hollywood going to take any and all excuses to dump on good natured, empathetic altruism using a cynical, jaded, more adult character who also happens to be a woman? And maybe I've been punch drunk too many times here, but I I don't, especially given that James Gunn, outside of his work with Marvel and DC, has a very cynical, very belittling sense of humor. Look at his Scooby Doo movies, which the second one was a massive improvement of. But look at the first Scooby Doo movie, or look at some of his trauma work to kind of get what it's like when James Gunn's sense of humor is completely unbound. And I could easily see him writing her as taking Superman's optimism down a peg. Then again, the storyline in Superman versus the Authority has Superman's optimism vindicated and the Authority's boys-esque cynicism be proven wrong. So if that's the route they go, I withdraw my objection. but it also frustrates me that we're getting the Authority before we're getting a new Superman. So, and again, mostly probably to rip off the boys. Thus, I'm not filled with hope. Like I'm looking at this in as many layers that I can look at it in, and none of these, no matter which way I switch the pathway, we don't wind up with a good ending. We're halfway through the maze and I don't see a way out of it. There are like 5 different ways DC could screw this up horribly and nuke themselves. And then there's maybe one where they manage to pull through, and against all odds, we wind up 10 years from now saying we should have been nicer to James Gunn. He knew what he was doing. But I'm not putting my money on that particular timeline. I don't have a time stone like Doctor Strange in the MCU or nothing, but I'm looking at this logically, and the logic doesn't come down in James Gunn's favor. So if I'm wrong, then I will gladly be wrong. If I am wrong, may I be struck by lightning here and now. But I'm waiting a second to see if I get struck by lightning, and yeah, no lightning. So yeah. Uh, and if I'm wrong, may I be trampled by a room full of rabid kindergartners or something really absurd. But like seriously, I'm looking at this, and no matter which way I switch it, these seem like very wrong, very stupid, and most of all, and this is important, very disconnected choices. Making Amanda Waller Nick Fury can work. Um, doing a Batman the Brave and the Bold style Batman in the mainline DC universe could work. Um, doing a storyline that's gods and monsters focused could work. And in fact, please do. But like all of these ideas could potentially work, but almost none of them make sense together or add up to anything resembling a cohesive whole. And it's not like and it's not like I'm saying this to crap all over DC. I want DC to succeed. Um, Black Adam was one of my favorite movies of the year last year. Like, what more do you want from me? I'm on your side, James. Just give me something I can use to defend you with here. But no, he's being an idiot on Twitter. But no, he's firing and getting rid of all the things we like. But no, he's keeping all the things in the previous universe we didn't like. But no, all of his ideas are either too obscure to be meaningful, or nowhere near obscure and comic booky enough, or just seem poorly conceived and don't go together. Like, give me something, man. And it's just like, no, I'm not giving you anything. Just have to trust me that I'm not going to drive this universe that has a tendency of careening off of cliffs off yet another cliff. Well, there's the cliff, James, and you're looking a not inconsiderable amount like Wile E. Coyote here. And I'm not stupid enough to drive off the cliff with you. This isn't the end of Thelma and Louise. Uh, yeah, I could definitely see Supergirl winding up being a cross between Captain Marvel and Velma. I don't want that. I really, really don't want that, but it looks likely. A future that I don't like looks likely, and ignoring it will not make will not make everything okay, so I'm not gonna ignore it. Uh, good evening, Miss O. I saw you just joined the thing. I'm doing my take on the James Gunn DC Slate because I wasn't awake while he was doing his stream earlier, so I figured I would do mine. And yeah, long story short, none of these decisions internally make the most sense. They all rely on fans being deeper invested in the overall DC universe than they objectively are. They're all relying on copying Marvel Phase 4 more than they probably should. And they're requiring fans to be invested enough to engage in multimedia. Um, watching, because there are some shows that are animated, there are some shows that are live action, there are some movies that are live action, and that they're all supposed to be interconnected to the same story. And once again, James, Marvel has been trying that for all of Phase 4, and they have a lot more. They have a lot more capital to burn with regard. Like, they can afford to take risks. They can make cushions out of their piles of money and cultural impact. Like, from the freaking ether, they can pull these things. You, James, were handed a clusterfuck, and you seem to think you were handed the keys to the Marvel universe. And no, you almost were, because from what I hear of the original concept for Phase 4, they were going to go more cosmic, and James Gunn was going to headline it in the same way Kevin Feige headlined the first 3 phases, but then the gunning happened and he got fired, and they had to go multiverse saga instead. So like, I empathize with you trying your best to act as though everything is fine, James, but right now at this exact moment, you are looking a lot like the meme of the dog sipping tea as his house and everything around him burns. Except you, James, are not just placidly ignorant of these problems. Many of the things you're doing are making them worse. Like sassing everyone who defends Henry Cavill on Twitter, and whining that anyone who gets impatient for the announcement that you said would be released in late January is not released until like the very last day of January. Because, small thing, James, but when I say I'm going to do something in late January, it doesn't really count if I do it like the last day of January, like literally as the timer is running out. But I said that earlier. The upshot, folks, is that DC's future is riddled with problems, arbitrary, confusing, and doesn't really give what it advertised with its chapter title of Gods and Monsters. Wouldn't you go ahead and know it? Wouldn't you go ahead and know it? A attempt to get the DC universe off the ground is riddled with befuddlement problems and self-inflicted wounds before it's even off the ground. Gee, what does this sound like? Me from 10 years ago? Oh, well, it sounds exactly like what got us here in the first place. Wah, 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 wah. So, hopefully, James Gunn proves me wrong and is a miracle worker, and if he does, then I will make a retraction video. But I'm not holding my finger over the create live stream button on that one. I'm expecting that we will be here in another 5 years, where DC will inevitably try again. And next time they reboot the universe again, I hope it works, because that would be roughly around like 2028, or rather 2038, which would be the 100th year anniversary of the establishment of the comics golden age and also the DC universe. So that would actually be kind of kismet if James Gunn completely shits the bed and they have to reboot the universe again, but the third time is actually the charm, and they manage to create a new DC universe right on time for the 100th anniversary of the original DC universe. That would be fun. I would actually be in favor of that. So I guess full steam ahead for this James Gunn train wreck thing that we're doing. But I really wish we didn't have to. I really wish we could have just gotten something that a DC universe that I could hang my hat on. Because truth to tell, while I love both DC and Marvel, I've always favored DC over Marvel. And I've always favored DC characters and world building over Marvel's characters and world building. And yet, we're at the very least at 2.5 tries now of properly conveying a cinematic DC universe. And it looks like it's going to be a miserable clusterfuck that might end up taking the genre with it. Because here's the thing. Marvel is currently on the shakiest ground they've ever been on. Granted, their shakiest ground they've ever been on is still occasionally very good, but they're still on the shakiest ground they've ever been on. DC has been on shaky ground from minute one and refuses to take any of the life preservers people throw to it. So if DC if DC Mark III, which is essentially what I'm calling this is DC's third attempt to make a universe of a thing. If DC Mark III goes down in flames, like it seems it might, and Marvel is still going through their post Infinity Saga growing pains, we might be in for a Batman and Robin type situation. And I don't want that. I want the comic book genre to remain a stable genre. But it seems intent on destroying itself, because what will we have then? If DC and Marvel both shit the bed in spectacular fashion, in Amber Heardian fashion, if you will, then we have The Boys and we have Invincible. And I like Boys and I like Invincible, but they're not enough to sustain the entire genre. Well, the big two, just like in the comics, need to get their shit together. It seems like that's the tragic irony of all of this, is DC seems to be following Marvel's playbook in that they're jumping from all of the years of history they've had. They're jumping through the Golden Age, they're jumping through the Silver Age, they're jumping through the Bronze Age, and moving right to the edgy 90s / deconstructionist age, which is what Zack Snyder tried to do, and it backfired on him. And it's what James Gunn appears to be trying to do, because that was kind of the impetus behind Superman versus the Authority. It was comparing like the old school mom baseball apple pie value system to the new school 90s edginess. And again, The Boys did it. Also, Jupiter's Legacy did it, and Jupiter's Legacy was robbed from a season 2 and 3, and I hate that, because in my opinion, the Jupiter's Legacy thing for Netflix was actually a really good superhero show, which we'll never get more of. But in any case, Zack Snyder took us all the way to 90s edgy territory, and James Gunn, rather than reversing direction and going, okay, let's see if we can start at the Gold and Silver Age, again, he's going, let's go one step further into probably not good fodder for constructing a universe territory and do modern comics. Like, for as bad as Jeff Johns was at repairing the Snyderverse or the post Snyderverse, if James Gunn gets Bendis in there as a consultant, cities will burn, and one of them is probably going to be LA, if for no other reason than the DC studios will burn. Well, MK, they were wrong. Because, okay, here's the problem with Jupiter's Legacy. All right, you ready? They wanted it to be another The Boys. A lot of people seem to have wanted it to be another The Boys. What it actually was a juxtaposition between the golden age of comics, or the pulp age of comics, and the 90s era of like edgy comics. That's what Jupiter's Legacy was. And honestly, I find that to be more engaging than just, don't you know this genre we're in sucks, which is basically the comic The Boys and to some extent the show The Boys point. Although I will admit that The Boys show does it a lot better than the comic did. It's a lot less cynical, if you can believe it. Um, uh, yeah, MK. Yeah, I'll give that to you. You're never as good as people say you are when you win, or as bad as they say you are when you're losing. That being said, DC has been on a losing streak for a bit now, and it actually seems like James Gunn's mandate is trying to convince us all that the Snyderverse wasn't so bad after all. And I never thought we would sink lower than some of the worst aspects of the Snyderverse. And I genuinely thought they would do the smart thing and keep going with the course correcting. Follow the lead of things like Shazam, follow the lead of things like Wonder Woman, follow the lead of things like Black Adam, and slowly but surely make the DC universe something that can actually stand on the same footing as the MCU. But instead, they skipped over all of that and went right into what if we copied the worst tendencies of the MCU while still keeping some of our worst our tendencies that are unique to us. And we're all supposed to be thrilled by this, while James Gunn calls us all idiots for wanting what we want back. Okay, that's a choice we can make. I'm not making it. It's an option. It's not an option. I'm literally at this point. I'm where Nick Fury was at the end of Avengers when he was talking to the World Security Council. There, I respect that you've made that decision, but given that it was a stupid ass decision, I elect to ignore it. Anyway, I've rambled enough, and you guys don't seem to be that engaged with things in the chat, so I'm gonna call it there. Or actually maybe not, because like 3 or 4 things were said in the chat while I wasn't looking. Oh yes, I saw that. Apparently, in addition to every other problem the DC universe is having, even Zachary Levi is wanted by some mob somewhere for doing a wrong thing. Um, oh, you get. Oh, I'm sorry. You got some of you guys just got here. I will then I'll give it another 10 minutes. I just don't want to feel like I'm repeating myself too much because I'm well aware that that gets annoying. It gets annoying sometimes when I say things the first time. I can't imagine how annoying it is the third or fourth time. Because I'm well aware that I'm not exactly the most likable person under the sun. Okay, yeah, Jay. Summary for Jay, Jay Misso and all the latecomers. This is essentially my reaction to the James Gunn thing. First thing, as you can see by the title, James Gunn said the title of the first phase of DC proper was going to be Gods and Monsters, and then he proceeded to announce a whole bunch of projects that have neither gods nor monsters. And it left me feeling like that one Michael Myers character from Saturday Night Live, hence the title. DC Gods and Monsters contains neither gods nor monsters. Discuss, because that's where I'm at with it. Which is the first in a long litany of things that I think they did wrong. They kept Viola Davis, Amanda Waller, which was a mistake. If you're not keeping the characters people actually like, get rid of the characters people don't, please. Or at least make her actually put on weight for the character, just like men have to do when they play a character who has physical demands. Like that's one thing. Thing two is James Gunn wants the first Robin to be produced in 2 decades to be Damian Wayne, and I can't for the life of me assume why he would start with Damian, not not Dick, not Jason, not Tim, but Damian. And the movie that they're going to be in together is going to be entitled The Brave and the Bold, which Brave and the Bold is a 60s title. Damian Wayne didn't come in until like the edgy 90s era. Do you see the problem, James? Um, Also, Supergirl is getting a movie, but the Green Lanterns are relegated to a show. Um, and Supergirl is going to be traumatized and cynical, which on paper shouldn't be a problem because she did watch her people die and everything. But on not paper, they could very easily use her as a feminist Mary Sue cynic like Captain Marvel, and I don't want, especially when you consider that Superman probably is going to be at least somewhat more optimistic, and I could easily see a situation where she dumps on his optimism. The Authority is a very obviously transparent attempt by DC to rip off the boys, which will not work. Booster Gold could either rip off Shazam or Deadpool, neither of which would work. Blue Beetle, I just don't know where to place. Like, he doesn't fit with anything. And the only, like, god or monster related thing in the entire DC slate, as far as I can tell, is Swamp Thing, and he's coming out last. So, I'm confused. Yeah. So like not even the edgy 90s territory. I actually gave him a little bit too much credit. He was in the 2000s when people honestly stopped giving a fuck about DC because they kept rebooting their universe every 5 years. And of course, lest we forget the New 52, which had some good ideas but mostly was a failure. Yeah, but the problem with your charity there, MK, is that the Authority as characters are very similar to the boys. And the purpose of the boy, or rather, the purpose of the Authority in the comic was to contrast Superman's optimism, which they could do. James Gunn could come down on the side of Superman, and we could basically get a version of Superman versus was it Superman versus the Elite where the Authority showed up? But in any case, on paper, it very much seems like the Authority is DC's attempt to rip off the boys, especially because if you watch the video um where James Gunn announces the Authority, or where he announces the whole slate rather, when he gets to the Authority, he describes them just like the boys. They're characters who have become disillusioned with traditional heroism and have decided that they should win by any means necessary and so on. And given again where the comic concept started out, A plus B equals oh, so you're ripping off the boys, which was my thought when I heard that was oh, so you're taking characters who are cut from roughly the same cloth as the boys, and your description of them fits just as well to the boys as it does to the Authority. So DC probably one of the DC executives went, "The Boys does really well. We're ripping it off." And James Gunn was like, "Okay, that's." And maybe I'm being cynical, and fair enough. If I'm being cynical, then so be it. But I can't see how you could do the Authority without ripping off, um, ripping off the Boys. It's it just now. Granted, there is a way out of this, and I just described it, where the Authority is kind of a ripoff of the boys, but the headline is the boys style thinking is wrong and Superman style altruism plus empathy is correct. Um, but who knows? And by the way, even if James Gunn does his Superman semi well, there's still the specter of everyone wanted a continuation of Henry Cavill, and you not only said no, but you were you were virtually dancing about it. So also you bought into the whole Henry Cavill is toxic narrative. These things will not win you many fans, James. Yeah, but given that it's James Gunn, there's going to be some level of over the top comedy, and given his kind of edgy sense of humor, I don't think they're going to try and dispute the humor. Um, Especially because if they veer too close to what the Snyderverse tried to do with the overly serious tone, you're going to get the Snyder Bros claiming that they got ripped off, and you're going to get everyone who didn't like the Snyderverse going, Jesus Christ again, really. Like, so it's one of those. If they do the Authority in a different manner to the boys, people aren't going to be happy. And if they do the Authority in a similar manner to the boys, it's going to be a very transparent boys ripoff. And DC doesn't have the capital to blow on, let's take ideas from other people, like Marvel kind of does. Like, Marvel was able to take Batman v Superman and go, okay, let's do Civil War, partially because they were fairly certain, I imagine, that DC would find a way to screw it up, which they kind of did, and or they figured that Civil War was a different enough storyline and people had more investment in their characters, so they went ahead with the Civil War storyline. DC doesn't really DC doesn't really have that. They almost managed that with Black Adam, but apparently Black Adam bombed. So like DC really has to learn to color in the lines before it's okay. Like learn the principle of before you have the freedom to color outside the lines, you probably should at least try to color inside them first. Because so far you've been trying to color outside the lines, and you have given us artworks that wouldn't grace the inside of a modern art gallery, let alone a traditional one. Yeah, and the reason Marvel got away with a lot is because up until recently, most of the time when they did something, they they were the better version. Like there were people when Civil War came out that looked over at BVS and went, "See, this is how you do it, DC. This is how you do the big crossover thing." Also, you probably shouldn't do it as your second freaking movie in your franchise, but whatever. And that's the other thing. A lot of James Gunn's slate of upcoming DC movies feels like it has one foot in and one foot out of anything and everything, and like they're just throwing darts at the wall to see what sticks. Like they keep certain aspects of the original continuity, they get rid of aspects that people liked, they keep aspects that people didn't like. There are some animated shows, um, some live action shows, and some movies, and they all interconnect in the same way as MCU Phase 4 is supposed to, which Marvel hasn't had a lot of success with. Now, granted, if this works and DC actually manages to do what Phase 4 of Marvel couldn't do and make the you have to watch shows, movies, and animated shows um, to understand our overarching story. If they manage to make that work, then I will give them the same credit I just gave to Marvel for basically taking the gist of BVS and going, our characters are more established, our characters are more well-rounded. Let's do Civil War, but actually even manage to do it better than the Civil War comic. Because that was the other thing that Marvel gets a lot of credit for with Civil War is they improved on Civil War the comic, which isn't hard because I think most people can at least agree that Civil War happened towards the beginning of Marvel's biggest downfall, starting around like 2007. It was Civil War that caused One More Day. It was Civil War that started the heroes fighting other heroes instead of fighting villains trend. it was Civil War that ultimately led to the Illuminati and World War Hulk, which ultimately led to Doctor Strange's downfall. Guess why I care so much about that part. Like, Civil War was the beginning of the end for Marvel for a very, very long time. And rather than fix a lot of their problems, then the SJWs came in and went, how can we deliberately, how can we push this even further into the ground without realizing we're doing it? And now we're at the SJW Marvel stage. So yeah, that's Civil War was very much the beginning of the end of Marvel. Yeah, but the problem, Austin, is Star Wars can actually pull that off because the movies are solid enough projects to begin with that they can sustain a larger universe. And so much of the lore was already written by the time they started making TV shows because of the novels that existed in the 70s, that it was basically a cohesive universe. Cinematic DC and cinematic Marvel apparently struggle a lot at audience retention when they swap from movies to other things. There are people who like the shows and there are people who don't like the shows, but at the end of the day, the biggest issue is the audience for the movies doesn't show up for the shows anything like as consistently as they show up for the movies. And the more the movies in turn rely on the bonus material, the shows and the animated shows, um, the more people are getting slowly but surely annoyed at all of it. And of course, the SJW Marvel problem isn't helping. But then again, I could easily see some of James Gunn's decisions becoming very social justice-y in nature. Like I could easily see Supergirl becoming off-brand Captain Marvel. I could easily see um I could easily see the Superman franchise never really get off the ground because people are still butthurt over how Henry was treated, which is entirely valid, by the way. I'm still annoyed at it too, and I don't even like Superman that much because that was just some bullshit. Um, there are people who are annoyed that some characters are still in and some characters aren't because they would like to see everyone be treated the same way. I.e., if you're going to get rid of Henry and Gal, show Ezra Miller the door and show Viola Davis the door. But no, we have to keep Viola Davis because Amanda Waller has to be the new Nick Fury. Never mind that you could have just recasted her. Like, you didn't have any problems recasting Henry. Why the frick was it so hard to recast Amanda Waller? Um, and of course, the whole Ezra Miller situation. Also, it's worth noting that the entire success of James Gunn's new universe is very much dependent on how Flashpoint does, because that's the hitting the reset button movie, because it's Flashpoint. And given the obvious Ezra Miller boycott that is going to befall that, and the fact that his version of the character of the Flash, it wasn't all that liked to begin with. I remember a lot of people calling him Autistic Flash, and a lot of people comparing him to Sheldon Cooper, and those comparisons weren't exactly unapt. So, yeah, like his version of the character is not liked, and then you have the very real and fundamental reasons why a lot of people might be turned off by supporting him. And then you have the specter of DC doing whatever it can at the moment to piss off the fans, which also doesn't seem to um, lend much hope to DC's future. Because if Flashpoint bombs, for example, like if it bombs horribly, which it might very well bomb historically, it might be the next Strange World or Lightyear for all we know. If Flashpoint bombs, that was DC has been running on Hail Marys this entire time in a lot of ways because every time they screw something up, they go accident, mulligan, and then they pull a Hail Mary, and the Hail Mary often flounders, and they were almost back to cohesive universe status with the course corrections they made to the Snyderverse. And then James Gunn and Peter Safran and David Zaslav went, sorry, I know some of that you really, really liked, but nope, no more. And now everyone's mad. And James Gunn is not doing a single thing to make them not mad. So, like, the fan base isn't on your side. The actor isn't well liked. The character version portrayed by the actor isn't well liked either. And everyone is off in their own little reasoning as to why they don't like things. The Snyder Bros are mad because Snyder got done dirty. The reformed Snyderverse people are mad because everything they like isn't applicable anymore. The just reboot the universe entirely and start from scratch people are mad because so much of the old order is still lingering. And the people who don't really care about any of this and just want to see good movies aren't really willing to give DC the benefit of the doubt anymore. And also between the Amber Heard thing crippling Aquaman 2 and the Ezra Miller thing crippling Flashpoint, these are some dark days for DC. And DC has a surplus of dark days and not too many bright ones, it seems. Yeah, he did. The whole everything needs to be dark and gritty because the only comics I like are the edgy 90s ones. It really also the I need to cram Randian objectivism into every corner of everything thing he did also just why. But yeah. But there are I'm including the Snyder Bros into the calculations because there are a lot of them, and for some reason people like those movies. And I don't want to alienate and piss those people off because I've liked unpopular things too. So maybe they're seeing something we're not, that all of us aren't seeing. And if that's true, then more power to them. But nevertheless, no matter which way you switch it, everyone has a reason to not like DC. And quite a lot of people are also quote unquote done with the MCU post Endgame and post MCU and post whatever else the black pills are saying today. So like I worry slightly about the genre because Marvel is at its weakest it's ever been. DC never really got off the ground to begin with, and looks to be committing seppuku again for like third time now. And if Marvel and DC both go away or both are on such weak footing that the House of Cards collapses, what's going to sustain the genre? I mean, we're basically at that point. If Marvel and DC basically shit the bed in an Amber Heard fashion, we're left with The Boys and we're left with Invincible as like superhero content. So it might very well, if DC fucks up this time and Marvel can't get their shit together, it may very well take the entire genre with it for a while, and I don't want that. Especially because 2038 will be the 100-year anniversary of comics. So it would be very nice if the superhero genre was still around in 2038, so we could all take a look back and go, hey, this genre that no one had any faith in lasted for 100 freaking years. But maybe not. See, that's the thing. I don't think it's a bubble. I don't think it's a bubble. I don't think this was some inevitable fated thing to happen. If both DC and Marvel get their shit together and start releasing quality content again, everyone will forget their mistakes, and the comic book genre will take their place. The superhero genre will take its place along every other genre in the world as equally respected as something like sci-fi or fantasy. But the problem is not that there is such a thing as superhero fatigue, because I don't think there are. The Boys does amazing viewer numbers, and Invincible does amazing viewer numbers. It's not people getting sick of superheroes. at least not in general. It's people getting sick of lackluster superhero content. Because when there's a lot of a good thing, people are happy, just like they were in 2017, 2018. But when there's a lot of something that's mediocre or draining, then people get upset. So no, I don't believe that superhero genre is a bubble. I don't think I don't think this was some pre-fated, cursed by the gods, inevitable downfall thing. I think this was, you had every opportunity to not fuck this up, but you got complacent and now you're fucking up. That's what this is. And if they both get their shit together and kick out anyone who says otherwise, then we'll be back to where we were in roughly 2018, and the superhero genre will be king again. But at the moment, if superhero genre is king, I'm seeing the sword of Damocles hanging over a lot of it. I'm seeing the sword of Damocles hanging over its head, and James Gunn is playing around with the hair that keeps the sword in place, and Kevin Feige isn't doing anything to prevent him from doing that. So we might see the genre decapitated, at least temporarily. It'll be back, though. I have no doubt that even if everything comes crashing and burning, in 20 years at the most, probably closer to a little bit under a decade, superhero genre will come back. And the reason I think that is, so many of my generation grew up with Justice League and the DCEU, the DC animated universe, and the 90s X-Men and the 90s Spider-Man and so much other superhero content, and also the earliest live action movies, all the way up through the MCU and so on. Like, so many people have grown up on and around superhero content that I don't doubt there's going to be a wave of nostalgia in 20 years, assuming that the genre does go bust, that will bring it back. And when that happens, hopefully people like us will be able to say, we told you so, that it was the lack of quality all along. But yeah, I think DC is headed for yet another slate of dark times, and the genre might follow with it, unfortunately, this time, because Marvel's not keeping the boat afloat like they're supposed to. Okay, uh, Sippy, I think is how you say your name, or no, it's uh Spiffy Gonzalez. Spiffy Gonzalez. We really don't want. I really don't want to have to rant about how I hate the stupid superhero genre is mythology comparison, because it leaves you with the impression that superhero genre is only valuable as an extension of mythology rather than being valued just like everything else as its own thing. So, frankly, I find the superhero genre is Greek gods or gods in general or mythology in general um, to be extremely annoying, extremely kind of disingenuous, and extremely belittling for the unique value that superhero comics have that doesn't rely on them being modern mythology. But let's not. I'm already. It's a little after. It's almost 1, so I'm going to see what you guys have to say, because I don't really have anything else to say, and then we're gonna. Yeah, because it instrumentalizes the value of superheroes. It it's basically like saying you're only a derivative copy, or your value is only as it's related to this other thing. And I don't believe that. Also, something worth noting, mythology was only treated as mythology in the last 100 years or so, i.e., for most of the history of mythology, people were convinced it actually existed. What we call mythology now is just the religion of the Greeks or the Romans or the Egyptians or the Norse or the Native Americans or whichever culture you want to swing it. Things we call mythology are just ancient religions that we've lost respect for. And comics never did that. Nobody ever was genuinely convinced that these characters existed. So the comic books are modern mythology thing can just piss off. It's instrumentalizing. It treats the value of comics like they're not intrinsically linked to comics themselves individually, or that comics don't bring unique value that wasn't present in mythology. And it ignores the fact that mythology, what we call mythology and what we've called mythology for the last 100 years or so, was once a thing people actually believed for several thousand freaking years, and many of the old polytheistic religions are also making comebacks. So not only is that disrespectful to comics because it implies the value of comics isn't individually linked to comics themselves, it also trivializes the fact that that mythology kind of isn't for a lot of people. That doesn't, and by the way, I'm not saying that to diminish the meaning of comics. In fact, I'm doing the exact opposite. I think the meaning of comics is enough on its own. It doesn't need to be tied to other things to be valuable. And if you wanted to tie it to something, you'd tie it to folk tales more than you would capital M mythology, because most of comics was born out of penny dreadfuls and dime novels, which were loosely connected to essentially urban legends and like urban folklore, not mythology. So even if you wanted to make the value of comics is tied to something else in history thing, mythology isn't the route you should go. You should go penny dreadfuls, dime novels, and pulp stories because that's the actual documentable one. That's what actually, historically happened to create comics in the first place. Penny dreadfuls, dime novels, and pulp stories evolved into comics. Less fairy tales like Grimm Brothers, and because again, that fairy tales, for one thing, fairy tales used to be horror stories. Like they used to be the kind of things you would tell children. The Grimm Brothers massively, massively sanitized things, and then Disney went and turned that sanitization up to 11. Fairy tales used to be the horror movies because you do not fuck with the Fae. You do not fuck with the Aoshi or the Tuatha unless you want to have a very, very bad day. And also, given the Fae are tied into Celtic mythology, it runs into the same problem as most superheroes or modern mythology, um, because most of fairy lore is tied into Celtic mythology, which is honestly a mythology most people don't know much about, and I find that kind of befuddling because given that most people in the West are some version or other of European, you would think that like fairy folklore and Celtic folklore would be something we would know more about, but kind of not. Like the most people know about Celtic folklore comes from fairy tales. But that's a actually writing project for a different day because for those that don't know, me and my friend the Brainstormer of Pop Culture are writing a comic called the Lionhearted Universe, and we borrow a lot from a lot of different mythologies, but the one we borrow most heavily from is fairy folklore and Celtic mythology, probably. But that's a shill for that's a shill of a different color. By which I assume you mean am I of Celtic descent? Probably, considering that my father's side of the family hails from Scotland. I actually had a teacher who was an amateur uh, ge- uh, ge- genealogist once, and she traced my lineage back for me, and apparently my dad's side of the family is Scottish. My mom's side of the family is English and French, as far as we know, and we think there might be some Native American mixed in there because given where we're located, um, the part of Pennsylvania that I'm from is very big with the Iroquois and the Susquehanna Indians. So we think there might be some Indian in there somewhere, but I don't claim any substantive claims about that because that would make me Elizabeth Warren, and I'm not Elizabeth Warren. I'm not going a one drop rule. Um, but frankly, I love I love Celtic myth and Celtic folklore, and in my magical practice, um, I engage with a lot of entities from that neck of the woods. I also engage, or am going to engage. I guess I should put this in the right chronological order. With any luck in the next year or so, with a lot of ancient Greek sort of stuff, because I've got a bunch of stuff on the Greek magical papyri and the Orphic hymns and so on, for reasons that I will not go into. Um, so yeah, I I guess part of the reason I get so annoyed with the modern mythology thing is because as a polytheist and as an occultist, I do regularly engage with spirits and entities that people think are mythical in the negative sense. Because that's the thing. Mythic doesn't have to mean fiction. It can mean on an epic scale, which is why I don't hate the word mythic. Like it's a good word because it means worthy to be the subject of myth. And that doesn't necessarily mean fiction. That means a story people tell because it's useful to them for time out of mind, basically. People try all sorts of things to shorten my name. I prefer to just be called Dalton, frankly. And yes, it is fairly unique because my mother made a point to make sure all of my brother's names and mine were unique. It actually means town in a valley. Um, because yes, I looked up what my own name means. And that's funny because where I grew up is very describable as a town in a valley. Names are funny. But anyway, we've gotten way off into the weeds here. So unless anyone has any final thoughts on the James Gunn DC thing, I think we should call it because we've been going for an hour 27 or so. Yep, yep. In the immortal words of Yakko Warner, good night, everybody. And in the immortal words of, or the semi-lasting words of me, hopefully. Cheers, everyone, and we'll see you all next time.